Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a frontline update for the 3rd of December 2022. I'm feeling somewhat better today, although a long way from being very well. Sorry to have not provided updates for the last couple of days, or at least yesterday. There's a horrible virus going through the UK at the moment, and I've got progressive multiple sclerosis, and it's really hit me hard. I lost the ability to walk 2 nights ago. I've had 3 delirious nights, and it's affected my central nervous system, so I couldn't even turn my body over in the night. I was just like stuck. But now my central nervous system is repairing itself, and I'm able to do some frontline updates for you. However, worse things happen in Bakhmut, so enough of my whinging. But thank you for all your support. I mean, getting ill when you got MS is just, it sucks, I guess. Okay, not a lot has happened overnight. There's been some missiles, I think, hitting Zaporizhia and areas to the south of Zaporizhia. Marinets and Nikopol are always under a lot of pressure from Russian artillery. And Kharkiv, I believe, has been hit by S-300s. Yeah, I think it's down here. The Russians are using Grads to hit some of these places around there. So, quite a lot of Grad rockets. S-300s are surface-to-air missiles that can be used in the secondary mode to attack ground targets, but they're not particularly accurate. So it's just a sign, I think. I mean, Russia have a shed load of S-300 missiles compared to cruise missiles that they're running low on. There's been a lot of talk in the intelligence community about, evidence that they are running low. And in fact, the idea that they haven't had subsequent cruise missile saturation bombings is almost certainly evidence that they are running low, and they have to, get together more missiles from different corners of the globe, probably, to provide their planes and submarines and ships in the Black Sea and around the area with the right ordnance. Anyway, onto the front line. So 510, as is according to the Ukrainians, of course, 510 personnel liquidated Russian troops, 1 tank, 3 APCs, 1 artillery system, 1 helicopter, 8 UAVs, so drones. A lot. That's a real big uptick in drones. And I wonder if just clearer skies or something. Weather is really important. So the weather has, certainly in the northern area, frozen quite a lot, so the ground is a lot harder, which means and the Ukrainians have announced that there will be more maneuvers over the coming days and week. Serhii Haidai, who's in charge of the operational group up here for the Ukrainians, has said pretty much that the weather will mean there's a lot more going on, and 8 vehicles and fuel tanks hit as well. But that UAV, it seems pretty interesting uptick there. Okay, let's go to this Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line, so the northeast from here down to there. And we're going to go between Kupiansk and Svatove, where there has been some activity. So just north of Pavlivka, so Svatove is further down here, Svatove. And then as we come north of Svatove, there is an area, south of Vilshana and Persha-Travnevi, where not a lot is going on. I think the Russians have pretty much built their defenses fairly well around there, and there's no movement. But Orlianska and Yahidne here, there has been some news. So 3 vehicles have been geolocated to be, so that's an MLRS, a Uragan, and 2 special vehicles, and a shooting location captured south of Yahidne. And that is showing that the Ukrainians have possibly advanced to the east and towards Novotarasivka. As some are saying that their target in this area could be a place called Verkhnya Duvanka, and cutting logistics up there, and a road that sort of comes down south towards Svatove, and it could be this highway that comes up from Svatove as well. So whether there's a larger attempt for the Ukrainian forces to do something. What it's worth noting is that the Ukrainians aren't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. And I know people like War in Ukraine and other channels are saying, well, they've lost their momentum. This is allowing the Russians to fill up the gaps with their mobilized soldiers. And that is a worry. Yep. The Russians are certainly being able to plug lots of gaps right up and down their lines, especially with reinforcements from Kherson, but that's the same for Ukraine in terms of Kherson. The Ukrainians are also mobilizing, I think, people in the newly liberated areas of Kharkiv and a little bit of Luhansk. So they are getting some troops trained up and mobilized from here. Obviously, there won't be too many young men or men left in the age groups compared to what there would have been. But it's worth remembering that there is something going on, right? They're not just like sitting around in their HQs going, what should we do next? I'm not sure. They've got a plan. They are executing a plan. And although it might seem very slow to some people, they are softening areas up in the way they did in Kherson. And it could be that there a lot of people are saying that the advance is going to come in Luhansk. It's looking very probable that it could be this Luhansk area, but it could also be down in the Zaporizhia area. But where they are doing a lot of softening around Tokmak, Melitopol, and north of Melitopol, lots of logistics junctions are being hit around here. HIMARS are very busy. So, things are happening. However, on the flip side, defenses are being built up by the Russians, and they're being built up behind this line all the way down here. So it's worth, I'll just give you a bit of a sidebar now. Let's look at the topographical map. So this is a topographical map of Svatove. So this is a Svatove, Krasny down to Kreminna here. Up, and then Kupiansk is over here on the Oskil River. This is the Krasna River. So you can see it's got a very sort of low elevation, as in low altitude, because it is a river, valley of sorts. The defensive lines are being set up behind that on the high ground. So even if the Russians lose this with the P66 highway and the logistics up to Svatove and Svatove itself, they will be able to hammer, you would imagine, with artillery from defensive lines from the high ground behind that. If we look at Defmon, so I've shown you a lot of Defmon stuff. Well, here's his scribble map that he gives you access to, and this shows exactly that. So the Svatove low ground and the river valley, if you like, goes along here where my cursor is, and this is the line of defenses that he's geolocated. So you can see that those defenses sit behind on the high grounds all along here, right up north, almost to the border. So there is evidence that, or some good reason to think that any advance of the Ukrainians will be slowed down, won't be too easy. So that includes big tank trenches. I think mounds behind that. Then they have infantry trenches and revetments with which are these kind of dug-in little pockets where you can put artillery or tanks or whatever, and then artillery behind that as well. So and this will be mined and all sorts. So it'll be difficult for the Ukrainians to make an advance, that's for sure. And this is plays into what people like War in Ukraine are saying, which is the time that the Ukrainians have allowed the Russians has allowed them to build up their capacity in terms of numbers of troops, but also their defensive capabilities right up and down the lines. Anyway, back to the front line I was talking about. It's unlike me to go off on a tangent. So there is some reason to believe that Ukrainians have made advance up to the north of this line. But if we come down to Kuzymivka, they are under a lot of pressure. Now, the Russians have said that they have repelled attacks from the Ukrainians in Kuzymivka, but at the same time, which is to the east of Novoselivska. But at the same time, they are clearing out Novoselivska. So it looks like the Ukrainians have been beaten back in Novoselivska and only have sort of a toehold in the western part of the settlement. Kuzymivka is in lower elevation or lower altitude ground here. You've got a higher ground here where this wooded area is, and Novoselivska is on a higher ground. So this would be a very useful settlement for the Ukrainians to hold, but they don't, and they're coming under a lot of pressure from the Russians there. So not as good there for the Ukrainians as it is further north, but it could be just a case of push and shove, and a bit like a yo-yo, some of these settlements. As we come down, there's almost certainly lots going on in artillery duels, but really all the news is about Ploshchanka and Chervonopivka. Ukrainians almost certainly got a foothold in Ploshchanka, if not full control, but it's been shelled for a couple of weeks now, But at the same time, the Ukrainians will have fire control to some degree over the P66 highway that goes along here, and small arms fire and all sorts. Whilst at the same time, Russians are also still putting pressure on Makiivka all the way back to the west here. So I think there was a Russian soldier that was captured around here just now. So there's a, on the one hand, the Ukrainians are really far to the east over here, and on the other hand, the Russians are putting pressure far to the west over there. So worth bearing in mind. Russians claim that they repelled 3 attacks around Pavlivka. Ukrainians are putting pressure on Holokova, Spirne, and Zitlivka. Let's see what our good friends, the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, say. Ukrainian Russian sources reported Ukrainian forces made localized breakthroughs southwest and northwest of Kreminna on December the 2nd. A prominent Russian mill blogger claimed the Ukrainian forces made marginal advances in the forest south of Kreminna and have reached the outskirts of Chervono-Pavlivka. I think they've been there for some time, which is why Russia have been shelling them. So it's not that they've just reached the outskirts. This is obviously a Russian mill blogger, not really being as truthful, because they wouldn't be shelling that if the Ukrainians weren't there, and they've been shelling it for a week. The mill blogger added that Ukrainian forces have intensified their counteroffensives. That's going to be due to the weather change, I would have thought, along the entire front line and in the area of the Svatove-Kreminna highway. Okay, we'll come on to the area in the forest just to the south of Kreminna. So as we come down towards Kreminna, there have been reports that the Ukrainians really are quite close to Kreminna in certain areas, particularly down south. But that will almost certainly just be sort of recon groups and what have you. Bit of a grey zone directly to the west, but there is geolocated evidence that Ukraine definitely controls an electrical substation about 5 kilometers to the southwest of Dubrova. Dubrova, some people have contested, some people have Ukrainian. I think, was it not a week ago that there was some reports, where was I reading? Here we go. War Gonzo reported Ukraine recaptured Dubrova last week. Control remains contested, says Malcontent News, but the line of conflict has probably moved northeast based off Kremlin reports from Russian sources. So, in other words, what this source is saying is that War Gonzo, who's a Russian source, claimed that Dubrova fell to the Ukrainians, or was liberated. He wouldn't have said liberated, but liberated by the Ukrainians a week ago, and that the Ukrainians are moving to the northeast. So there you go. That's what's happening around there. A lot of activity, I think, going around in this forested area. As I said, there were some claims. I haven't heard anything in the last 24 hours that the Russians had made advances up here. And a lot of talk, people like Defense Politics Asia talking about how, he does a lot of speculation onwards from claims. So he then says, and they're going to do this and do that and X, Y, and Z. But it's establishing whether the initial claims are correct. That the Russians have in fact gone there in any meaningful way, and not just sort of recon in force moves. Down here, there's shelling of Vuhledar, and I believe back towards the Ukrainians in Vuhledar. So there you go. In fact, I think Malcontent might say something about that. Yeah, so there's FIRMS data. So FIRMS data is, just to remind you, is data from NASA that was originally set up to check whether there are wildfires going on, forest fires around the world, and being able to keep a handle on that and alert people and etc. But it's been exceptionally useful data to finding out where there are particular hotspots in terms of shelling, and artillery, rockets, and then the subsequent where that ordnance lands, causing fire and whatnot. So FIRMS data shows that there's all sorts of oil refineries here. I showed geolocated footage that I geolocated myself to a Russian tank being hit around here, I think last week, and that's being shelled by the Ukrainians. So that's under pressure there. Anyway, other than that, not a lot of change. I've not, as I said, not heard much about that incursion there. Spirne as well, and we come on down towards Bakhmut. Okay, as we come towards Bakhmut, there's some interesting claims from the Russians that they are, putting a lot of pressure on Spirne. There's also claims that there's a repelled attack near Avdivka. Now, that's an awful long way behind Ukrainian lines, really. So that's something to watch out for. If they have got that far to the north of Bakhmut, then that could be a worry. But sometimes these are just sort of reconnaissance groups that can just get behind lines. It might only be a very small group, reconnaissance in force, and then being repelled just means they had a bit of a gunfight and then moved back, and that happens for both sides. As they are trying to gather information on defences from the enemy or about the enemy. But there you go. Other than that, really, not too much has changed. There are. It's really tough in Bakhmut. The Russians claim to have made a bit of progress in Opitny and areas to the south. So Klishchivka, I think. It's all about Klishchivka, as I said before. The Russians have cleared out Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna. I need to change my mapping around here, so it's somewhat out of date. Sorry about that. But it's just difficult trying to find out exactly which side controls which area. But this area, about 800 meters to the west of the highway here, is apparently just like a killing zone, no man's land, as far as there's no cover there, and it's just ripe for artillery and all sorts. Especially since back here it's on higher ground. So there you go. That is that. The ISW does have something that's worth pointing out here. The Ukrainian Joint Forces Task Force published an interview with a Ukrainian soldier in the Bakhmut area on December the 2nd, in which the soldier states the conditions are incredibly harsh and that Russian forces continue to push offensive operations in the area, despite the number of casualties. So the Russians are obviously losing a hell of a lot of people. It doesn't really matter for them. As ISW has previously assessed, the Russian effort to take Bakhmut is a high-cost effort concentrated on the city of limited operational significance. It's really tough for the Ukrainians around there. But whether it'd be worth it in the end for the Russians, who knows? Okay, as we move further south, we come on to, past Mayorsk and on to Avdivka, and just to the sort of north, the front line to the northeast of Donetsk city, and a few things to say about that. So a bit of conflicting reports around Avdivka. There are some Russian mill bloggers saying that there's fighting now on the very southern outskirts of Avdivka. That's a little bit of a worry if the Russians are moving into some urban warfare there, because generally there's been a buffer zone around Avdivka. Pervomaisky has been another mechanized Russian assault, sort of a tank attack. I think one tank was hit with an ATGM and is burning up. This is where there's a bit of contradiction. So some Russians are saying that the Russians have got a really big foothold in this town, or it's basically what's left of it. It's just an apocalypse going on there. And then you get others. So here's Malcontent News saying that Ukrainian forces pushed the First Army Corps of the DNR mostly out of Pervomaisky. They weren't very deep into the town in the first place, with most attacks from the U-50 highway near Pisky. Also pushed back from Ukraine firebase at Novelsky. So that's interesting, and I can't really find much evidence either way. There has been a geolocated mechanized tank attack there, so that happened. Other than that, like the general sense is that it was repelled. Whether the Ukrainians pushed the Russians are meaningfully back, I don't know. That other than that malcontent news source, not much more. And the claim is that the Russians have pushed back as well near Novelsky, which would be interesting. That's happened, but again, I need confirmation from another source to really take that on. Krasnohorivka is the scene of quite a lot of fighting as well, and then obviously Marinka. Not a lot of difference there. Just it's a bit of a hellhole. lots of combined arms activity and fighting right in the center of town. Yeah. So as we come further down south, we get onto Novomyrkhalivka and onto Pavlivka and Vuhledar. News from a couple of nights ago that Russia were using incendiary munitions on Pavlivka, which means that Ukraine probably have some kind of foothold still there. Vuhledar is being heavily shelled, so that's under a lot of pressure. But that again, nothing particularly unusual. Russians have repelled apparently another Ukrainian attack in the direction of Mikhailsky. So this is again seems to be quite usual that the Ukrainians are pushing south here whilst being under pressure in other areas around there. But there you go. There's certainly something to be said for what's going on in Zaporizhia at the moment, because there's an awful lot of softening the logistics and attacking, rocket strikes on particular targets all over the Zaporizhia area. Tokmak, Polohoy is particularly badly hit. In fact, there are claims that the Russians have really been having a bad time in Polohoy and have been, many hundreds of casualties, having to send everyone to Mariupol for medical care. And in fact, there's now evidence they're pulling out of Polohoy. So what are the Ukrainians doing? This kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is they are doing something. What is it going to be? Is it going to be up in the Luhansk area or in the Zaporizhia? They are certainly hitting lots of areas here, and they've caused the Russians a massive amount of pain and headache around there. So let's see what the ISW says. Ukrainian forces continue to strike Russian forces in Zaporizhia Oblast along critical logistics lines that could impact their ability to hold or equip defensive lines. The Ukrainian General Staff reported on December 2nd that Ukrainian strikes against a Russian force concentration near Kupiansk wounded over 100 personnel on December 1st. Ukrainian officials reported that Ukrainian forces struck Turpina, north of Melitopol, along the T401 Melitopol-Tokmak-Polohoy highway, and Yakimivka, southwest of Melitopol, along the E105 Melitopol-Jankoy highway, injuring and killing dozens of Russian military personnel, destroying 130 pieces of military equipment. Of course, did that happen? Don't know. Would like to see the evidence of that. But man, that would be properly critical for the Russians, losing that amount of stuff. And this is what, when I say they're not just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, they are doing things, the Ukrainian, and this is what they're doing. Ahead of something, one imagines. Zaporizhia Oblast occupation head Balitsky denied Ukrainian claims that Russian forces are withdrawing from Polohoy. So he's denied that and evacuating civilians from occupied areas close to the front lines. However, continued Ukrainian strikes against Russian force concentration and military assets along critical ground lines of communication, GLOCs, including Polohoy, on December 2nd, indicate that such areas remain vulnerable to Ukrainian interdiction efforts and that Russian forces may not be able to defend them. Ukrainian Mayor of Melitopol, Fedorov, stated that Ukrainian strikes killed and wounded over 1,200 Russian personnel in Zaporizhia Oblast since November the 27th. So in about a week, the Ukrainians are claiming in this area to have killed and wounded over 1,200 Russians. That is phenomenal. So there is a lot going on here with regard to HIMARS and MLRS strikes and whatnot. And that is causing a lot of pain to the Russian forces and to their logistics. Not a lot to report in the Kherson area, other than it seems that the Russians are pulling back people from certain settlements along the bank of the Dnipro River. Novokakhovka, apparently they're pulling out collaborators and administration from there. These places are being hit. At the same time, Kherson itself as a city is being hit by Russian shelling. So, yeah, there are exchanges of artillery, but the Russians are definitely sort of pulling back. Their logistics have been hit in this region as a whole. Skadovsk, Amiansk, these sort of places and Chaplinka get routinely taken, routinely receive arrivals, sort of rocket attacks and whatnot. No particular news from the peninsula here, the Kimburn Peninsula. there was claims that Ochakiv was hit by Russian shelling, and that there is shelling going on around the Kimburn Peninsula and Spit, shells going into the water and exploding in the water and all sorts around there. So there's definitely activity there. There's just no detail about exactly what's going on. So that's that's a frontline update. Hope that's useful for you. I probably missed out a lot because I'm not really with it, and it's funny, you miss a day of doing research and like there's just a big gap in information, and it's quite interesting. Little sidebar at the end. My usual routine when I go to bed at night is thinking, well, what would I do? So on the front line, and one of the thought experiments I have is, what would I do if I had 1,000 troops? Where would I put them? And I always come to the same conclusion. So I don't know why I keep thinking this, keep wondering. I always come to the same conclusion. It wouldn't make the blindest bit of difference. And yes, if you keep piling on troops somewhere, you'll get some kind of Pyrrhic victory. So if you had 100,000 troops, well, yeah, put them anywhere and you're going to force a breakthrough. There'll be some kind of overrunning of the defenses, but that's never going to happen. So realistically, what's going to change things along this line? And I keep coming back to the fact that, well, if you've got 20 HIMARS and other GMLRS, what would happen if you had another 20 HIMARS and then 8 ACMs? And that would make a big old difference. So let's have a look really quickly at Defmon's map, which is here it is. So Defmon's map also, he's got a HIMARS range, which I think is interesting and worth looking at. And you can see how far those HIMARS can go. So back to Starobilsk, which is here, just in range for the HIMARS. Of course, it depends where you put your HIMARS. He's got them pretty much as close to the front lines as he can get them. Certainly for this radius here. But Starobilsk is just here. Now you got 8 ACMs, and then suddenly all the logistics hubs and the build-up force concentrations of both troops and ammunition and supplies, which are all safe, somewhat safe around here, suddenly have to be moved back into Russia. And that, I mean, we keep talking about this term game changer. That is a game changer. Everyone keeps saying ATACMS, or longer range missiles, rockets. That would be the game changer, because suddenly this railway line is definitely taken out. Suddenly these railway lines back in Luhansk are taken out. Suddenly Mariupol, Melitopol, everything around here, and Crimea is under threat, and that's a game changer. So yeah, you could talk about, I don't know, 30,000 troops suddenly plugged in somewhere that might form a breakthrough and be very slow, kind of this or that. You give 20 extra HIMARS and 8 ACMs, that changes the game, and it would change it pretty quickly. And it's just really frustrating that has not happened. Maybe maybe it might be happening. Maybe things are happening behind the scenes, but for me, that's just really frustrating. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks so much for your support. Thanks for all your well-wishing. Last few days has sucked. I literally never been so ill in my life. Yesterday, I thought I was going to die. But hey, what difference a day makes. But not nearly as bad as what these guys on the front line are experiencing. So, about context, isn't it? Thank you for your support. Please like, subscribe, share. Please check out my videos on my other channel, ATP Geo. So youtube.com/ATPGeo. I think all my extra videos are going to go on there now, and I'm going to build that up as my new home for this kind of content. Anyway, thanks so much. Take care. See you later.